back to what you do with Teach the Geek. What is the most interesting thing or the most important thing that you have found doing that?
Well, it's really getting people to understand that their technical expertise is, having that technical expertise is great, but if you're not able to convey it to non-technical people, many of whom are decision makers, their technical expertise will go for nothing. Those ideas that you have, they won't ever get implemented. Because so it's really important to be able to communicate to these decision makers, and to do that, you need to, as you mentioned earlier, get down to their level so that they'll actually listen to what you have to say.
And so, how or what have you found to be the number one skill that people need to learn to be able to do that, to be able to convey the right message, to be able to speak more correctly to their audience?
It's knowing your audience. It's getting the sense of where they're at so that you can meet them there. I mean, when working in medical devices as an engineer, if I'm talking to other product development engineers like I was, I'm going to speak to them differently than I'm going to the salespeople who are typically non-technical. And one thing I would like to say is when I used to have to give these presentations in front of senior management, one way I used to make sure that I was addressing them in a way that was appropriate, at their level, was I would go to their administrative assistants. Oftentimes, these people are really busy, so they wouldn't have time to meet with me. But I could go to their admin and ask them what kind of information would I need to put into this presentation to keep them interested, for them to listen to what I have to say. I mean, a lot of times, if I was talking to the VP of R&D, they want to know more about the actual innovation, the research that was being done. But if you're talking to the CEO, he wants to know how that innovation or that technology is going to affect the long-term strategy of the company. So making sure that that information was conveyed in a presentation is really important to make sure that they stay engaged and listen.
Yeah, and I think, the day and age we're living in, engagement is everything. Eyeballs is everything. If you can get people engaged on like I was talking about earlier, your social media platform, your podcast, they're you're automatically winning, and that is a skill and that is a tool. And so for you to understand that in person, I think it definitely does translate over to the social media worlds. But a question I have regarding those two: do you find it more difficult to engage with an audience in person or through social media?
Well, I think it's easier to engage with people in person because can actually see them, and you can see their nonverbal communication, their verbal communication. You can pick up on cues more easily than on social media because you have no clue who's consuming your social media. So it's a bit more difficult, I would say.
Yeah, social media is a weird one too. Did you ever see it was a documentary on Netflix, Social Dilemma? Did you ever get a chance to watch that?
No, I did not.
So it's basically talking about how social media, how they run the algorithms, and how it's so dangerous because of how they target you and they keep you locked in. Like, it keeps you engaged and it keeps your dopamine centers. It's almost like a slot machine, and that is one thing that I will say, getting all this innovation that we were talking about and how fast it's going. We're moving people away from, and especially since COVID hit, we're moving people away from interactions with actual human beings and moving them onto these square boxes. Now, this is better than nothing. Me and you having a one-on-one conversation where I can see your face, it's better than nothing. But better than everything would be us sitting across from a table, because you can feel the energy, and that's something you can't get um, with being online. I don't know if you feel that way. I know you're probably very technical, you're very scientific, but I feel like, especially with positive people, you can feel the energy coming off them and you feel the conversation. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I certainly understand what you're saying, and I agree with you. It is easier to feel people's energy when they're across from you, when you can actually see them in person, as opposed to over the internet, or on social media.
Do you feel that energy and other people's energy is one of the ways that you have found to get people to engage with their audiences better, and how to convey messages better, is to get them engaged and get the energy up?
Oh yeah, certainly. And another way I think is helpful in getting people engaged in whatever presentation you're giving is to use stories. When I was a child, and perhaps when people were children, when your mother or father read you a bedtime story, it was always a treat. But for some reason, as we get older, we tend to move away from using stories to convey information. And perhaps there are even people that think that for more technical presentations, that like what engineers or scientists would have to give, stories are inappropriate, but they're still a very useful tool in getting people engaged and listening to what you have to say. Just being able to couch your data or your technical expertise in the body of a story.
And that is something that I've talked to countless people on the show and countless people in person. I don't know if you can tell I'm very talkative, but talking to a historian, we were having this conversation about humans are storytellers. Everything that we know is stories, music, stories, everything creative, basically. Movie stories, music stories. The way we basically create everything they're all stories. You can chop it up to whether you're religious or not. The Bible is a compilation of stories. You know, we can tell truthful stories, we can tell not so truthful stories, but they all have this profound meaning on what it means to be a human, you know. And so for you to connect the story realm with the business realm, it brings us back to, okay, we still are human and we still are these conscious beings that are in these meat sacks, you know. And so like we really need to connect with others, to whether you want to sell something or just like live a healthy, better mental life, you know.
Absolutely. And I mean, all a story really is information being conveyed in such a way that there's a clear beginning, middle, and end. So essentially, something happened. There were some things that happened in the middle, and then there was some sort of outcome. With the presentations that I had to give in front of management, what was really important was to also convey a call to action. So if there was something that we needed from the senior management in terms of either resources, for more money for the project, more time for the project, more people to work on the project, that needed to be conveyed very clearly during the presentation so that the senior management would know what was needed and what needed to be done.